Keanu Reeves sat alone in a quiet corner of the airport lounge, his black travel bag resting beside him, and his hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. The lounge was almost empty, but anyone who walked past him slowed down because there was something unusual in his eyes that morning. His expression was soft, thoughtful, almost emotional, as if something deep inside him was fighting to come to the surface. And just when the silence felt too heavy, Sandra Bullock walked in, looking tired, gentle, and completely unaware that her presence was about to change the entire day. The moment she saw him, she stopped, her breath caught not because he was famous and not because cameras always followed him. It was because she had not expected to find someone she cared about so deeply sitting alone with so much sadness in his eyes. Fans who later saw the video would say they noticed something beautiful in that exact moment, a kind of unspoken connection, a kind of warmth. But inside the lounge, no one knew what was happening inside Keanu's heart. Sandra walked toward him slowly, as if she was afraid any sudden movement might break him. Keanu lifted his head, surprised at first, and then his face softened in a way that only happened when he felt safe. She sat beside him, leaving a small but meaningful distance. He did not speak at first, and she did not push him. Instead, she waited with quiet kindness, giving him the space he needed to breathe. After a moment, Keanu whispered that he had been thinking about life, about time, and about how easily people forget to show kindness to themselves. His voice was low, almost shaky, but filled with truth. Sandra listened with full attention, her eyes warm and steady. She told him that he had given kindness to the whole world for many years, and maybe it was time someone reminded him that he was allowed to receive it too. That simple line made Keanu look away because he felt something unexpected build inside him. It was not sadness. It was not fear. It was something deeper, something that made him realize he had been holding too much inside for too long. He tried to change the subject, telling her he was just tired, but Sandra shook her head. She knew him too well. She knew when he was hiding pain behind calm words. A soft announcement echoed through the lounge, but Keanu and Sandra didn't move. They stayed together in that quiet bubble, and something powerful began to shift. For the first time in a long time, Keanu allowed someone to sit beside his silence. He allowed himself to be seen, and that was the beautiful detail fans later talked about. Not the way they sat together, not the way they leaned closer when they whispered, but the way Keanu's eyes slowly began to glow again, as if Sandra's presence reminded him that he was not alone. Sandra gently placed her hand on his, not to comfort him like a friend, but to remind him that he still had people who cared. Keanu did not pull away. Instead, he let out a quiet breath that sounded like release, like relief, like the beginning of something healing, and in that moment something inside both of them shifted, something unplanned, something honest. Keanu looked up at her and whispered, almost too softly to hear, that he wished people understood how heavy kindness could feel when you forgot to give it to yourself. Sandra nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. She told him that maybe this moment was the universe's way of telling him to slow down, to breathe, to let someone else carry a little bit of the weight with him. As they sat there, close but gentle, the world outside continued rushing. But inside that lounge, time slowed down. Two hearts found space to heal, and one unspoken truth began to rise between them, something neither of them was ready to admit yet. The quiet moment between Keanu and Sandra inside the airport lounge did not last long. A soft vibration from Keanu's phone broke the silence. He glanced down, and Sandra immediately noticed his expression change. His calm face tightened, his eyes dimmed, and a heavy breath escaped him. Something was wrong, very wrong. She leaned a little closer, speaking softly so she would not startle him. She asked if everything was all right. Keanu hesitated, the way people do when they are carrying something they don't want to burden others with. But Sandra waited, patient and warm, and finally he showed her the message. It was short, only a few words, but the weight of it was enough to shake anyone. Keanu whispered that someone he cared about deeply was sick, and he had been on his way to see them. Sandra's eyes softened instantly. She knew how much loyalty meant to him. She knew he lived with quiet responsibility, carrying the pain of others without ever asking for anything back. She asked him what he needed. A ride, support, company, anything. But Keanu shook his head slowly, saying he didn't want to trouble her. That simple answer made Sandra's heart twist, because it showed how deeply he was used to standing alone. She told him gently that true kindness was not trouble. True kindness was presence. True kindness was showing up when someone needed you. And right now, he needed someone beside him, even if he didn't want to say it. Keanu looked at her, and there was a quiet storm in his eyes. Fear, worry, And something else he rarely allowed anyone to see, vulnerability. Sandra's presence felt like a blanket around that storm. She squeezed his hand again, not forcefully, but with soft assurance. She reminded him that he had been strong for so many people for so many years. It was okay to let someone be strong for him now. Then something unexpected happened. Sandra stood up and told him she was not leaving him alone today. She didn't care what the world thought. She didn't care about cameras or people whispering. She cared about him, and that was enough. Keanu tried to argue, but his voice cracked slightly. Sandra stopped him with a quiet smile. She told him that sometimes life sends you the right person at the right moment, even if you don't understand why. Today, he didn't need to understand. He just needed to trust. They walked toward the boarding gate together. At first, Keanu walked with steady steps, but Sandra could feel the tension in his shoulders. He was trying to stay calm, trying to hold himself together. Fans from across the lounge began noticing them, whispering softly. They saw the way Sandra stayed close beside him but didn't crowd him. They saw the way Keanu let her presence ground him. And they noticed something beautiful again, the way their energies matched, quiet but strong, gentle but powerful. When they reached the gate, Keanu stopped walking for a moment. He closed his eyes, trying to steady the rush of thoughts inside him. Sandra stepped in front of him, blocking the noise of the airport, giving him a small pocket of peace. She told him that whatever was waiting for him on the other side of this flight, he would not face it alone. A single tear escaped from the corner of Keanu's eye, not from sadness, but from the deep relief of being understood without having to explain himself. He quickly wiped it away, but Sandra saw it. She didn't mention it. She just placed her hand on his arm and told him she was right there. As they boarded the plane, a few fans captured the moment. They did not post videos about fame or drama. They posted about the way Sandra quietly supported Keanu without asking for anything in return, and the way he allowed someone to stand beside him during a heavy moment. They didn't know the full story, but they felt the connection. They felt the sincerity. They felt the truth that was slowly unfolding between them, even if neither of them had spoken it aloud yet. The plane took off into the soft morning sky, but inside the cabin, Keanu's heart felt heavier than the clouds outside. He sat by the window, his hands pressed together as if holding something fragile between them. Sandra sat beside him, her presence calm and steady, like a quiet lighthouse guiding someone through a dark night. She didn't speak at first. She knew Keanu well enough to understand that he needed a little silence before he could open up, and he didn't rush. He kept staring out the window, his expression filled with worry, and she waited with the kind of patience only true friends carry in their hearts. Finally, after several long breaths, Keanu whispered that the person he was going to see was someone who once saved him when he was at his lowest. Someone who gave him kindness at a time he didn't believe he deserved it. And now that person needed him. He felt fear, guilt, and helplessness all at once. Sandra listened closely. She could feel the weight in his voice, the way he carried his memories like shadows. She gently told him that showing up mattered more than anything, even if he was scared, even if he didn't have the right words. Sometimes presence was the greatest gift a person could give. Keanu looked at her with tired eyes. He whispered that he was scared of losing someone again. He said loss had carved deep marks inside him over the years, and every time he felt close to someone, a quiet fear always followed. Sandra reached out and took his hand, her touch soft but strong. She told him that fear grows when you face it alone, but it becomes smaller when you share it with someone who cares. Her words sunk into his chest like warm light. As the plane continued at cruising altitude, a slight turbulence shook the cabin. Sandra saw Keanu tense immediately, not because he feared flying, but because his heart was already unsettled. She placed her other hand on top of his, grounding him. He glanced at her and saw something he hadn't expected. Her eyes held a strength that seemed to wrap around his pain without judgment. She whispered that he was allowed to feel everything he was feeling. He didn't need to hide it, not today. Keanu let out a deep, shaky breath. For the first time in a long time, he let someone see him fully, not the calm star the world admired, not the quiet legend everyone respected, but the real man beneath all of it, the one who felt deeply, the one who carried old wounds with silent dignity. After a long moment, he finally spoke again. He told Sandra that the beautiful detail fans had noticed earlier was not about how they looked sitting together. It was about how her presence made him feel something he had forgotten. Safe. Sandra's eyes softened even more. She whispered that she was glad he felt that way. Glad she could be there when he needed someone. She reminded him that kindness was not weakness. Vulnerability was not weakness. Connection was not weakness. Sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was allow another heart to stand beside theirs. Keanu turned his gaze to her slowly with a quiet expression that carried layers of gratitude. He whispered thank you, but the words felt too small compared to what he felt. Sandra understood without needing anything more. When the plane began descending, Sandra noticed him growing restless again. She touched his shoulder gently and told him they would face everything together. Whatever was waiting for him, they would walk into it side by side. Her voice was steady, her presence unshakable. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words sink inside him like strength he had forgotten he had. The landing gear touched the ground and his heart beat faster. But for the first time, the fear did not feel bigger than him, because Sandra was there, and something inside him, something quiet but powerful, began to change. The airport at their destination was busy, loud, and filled with rushing footsteps, but for Keanu, every sound felt distant. He walked beside Sandra with slow steps, his mind heavy with worry about the person he was going to see. Sandra stayed close enough to support him, but she didn't push him. She understood his silence. She understood his fear. She understood the storm inside him. When they reached the car sent to pick him up, Keanu paused before getting in. He stood still, his shoulders tense, his breathing uneven. Sandra stepped in front of him gently, creating a small pocket of calm around them despite the noisy airport behind them. She looked into his eyes and asked softly if he was ready. Keanu swallowed hard and whispered that he didn't know. He said he had spent his whole life trying to be strong, but today he felt like he was breaking. Sandra placed her hand on his chest, right over his heartbeat, and told him that breaking did not mean he was weak. She reminded him that even the strongest hearts sometimes need to lean on someone. She reminded him that today he didn't have to carry anything alone. Keanu's eyes shimmered slightly, but he tried to hold himself together. Sandra smiled gently, the kind of smile that feels like warmth on cold skin, and told him that she would not leave him, not even for a moment. They got into the car. The drive was quiet at first, but Sandra kept her hand near his, close enough that he could feel her presence even when she wasn't touching him. It grounded him. It made him feel like the air in his chest wasn't collapsing. Halfway through the drive, Keanu finally spoke. His voice was low, fragile, almost trembling. He said he didn't know how to face someone who had been there for him when his life had been falling apart because he felt like he still owed them so much. Sandra took his hand gently and told him the truth that he needed to hear. She said that love, kindness, and care were not debts, they were gifts, and he didn't owe anything except his presence. That was enough. Her words hit him deeply. Keanu turned to her, and for a moment he let himself show the pain he had been holding inside. The car stopped in front of a small hospital. Keanu stared at the building as if it was a mountain he had to climb. His hands shook slightly and he closed his eyes, trying to find courage. Sandra reached out, wiped a tear from his cheek before it could fall, and whispered, "I'm with you, every step." Those simple words made him breathe again. They walked inside together. The hallway felt too bright, too cold, too quiet. Keanu's heart raced with every step. When they reached the door of the room, he froze. He felt fear grip his chest tightly. Sandra touched his back gently, grounding him again. She told him something that made his breath steady. She said that sometimes the hardest doors to open lead to the most important moments of our lives. Keanu nodded slowly and pushed the door open. Inside, an older man lay on the bed, his eyes tired but warm when they saw Keanu. The man tried to sit up, but Keanu rushed forward, telling him to rest, his voice cracking with emotion. He held the man's hand tightly. The man smiled weakly and whispered that he knew Keanu would come because Keanu always showed up for the people he cared about. Sandra watched quietly from beside the door, her eyes soft and full of understanding. She could see how deeply this man meant to Keanu. She could see how much love and history lived between them. She stepped closer, offering silent support, letting Keanu handle the moment in his own way. For the first time in years, Keanu felt something powerful inside him. He wasn't alone in his fear. He wasn't alone in his grief. He wasn't alone in his hope. Sandra's presence wrapped around him like light guiding someone through darkness. And without saying a word, he realized something deep and unexpected. This moment was shaping their connection into something neither of them had been ready to name. The room felt warm and heavy with emotion as Keanu sat beside the older man's bed, holding his hand with gentle care. Sandra stayed close enough to support him, yet she gave him space to speak, breathe, and feel without pressure. Keanu's voice trembled as he asked the man how he was feeling. The man smiled weakly and whispered that life had slowed down, but he was grateful for every breath he still had. Keanu lowered his head for a moment, trying to hide the pain rising inside him. But the man squeezed his hand softly and told him not to be sad. He reminded Keanu of something he used to say years ago, something he had forgotten. You do not honor people by carrying pain. You honor them by living with kindness. Hearing those words again made Keanu's eyes fill with tears. He tried to blink them away, but one slipped down his cheek. Sandra stepped closer, her eyes gentle, and placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. The older man looked at Sandra and smiled, sensing the quiet bond between them. He asked her to come nearer, and she did. He told her softly that Keanu had been through more sorrow than most people knew, but he also carried more goodness than most people ever saw. He said Keanu needed someone to remind him of the light he gave to the world. Sandra's eyes softened, and she promised she would stand beside him without expecting anything in return. Keanu turned to her with a surprised expression, touched by her words, and even more touched that she meant them. After some time, the older man grew tired. He asked Keanu for one favor. He whispered that he wanted Keanu to stop hiding his heart from the world. He said that love, connection, and kindness were not weaknesses, they were strengths. Keanu nodded slowly, but the man smiled and said he needed him to truly hear it, not just answer out of politeness. Keanu took a deep breath, squeezed the man's hand, and promised he would try, really try. A soft silence filled the room as the man closed his eyes to rest. Keanu remained seated, staring at his hand in Keanu's, afraid to let go even for a moment. Sandra gently touched his back, and he leaned into her without thinking, finding comfort in her presence. It was a small movement, but it showed something beautiful. He trusted her deeply. After the man fell asleep, Sandra suggested they step outside for a moment so he could breathe. Keanu nodded, though he looked back at the man several times before walking out. The hallway felt still and quiet compared to the emotional weight inside the room. Keanu leaned against the wall, closing his eyes, letting out a long, shaky breath he had been holding for hours. Sandra stood in front of him, her voice soft as she told him that he had been incredibly strong today. He shook his head and whispered that he didn't feel strong at all. He felt scared. He felt broken. He felt lost. Sandra stepped closer, her hands gently holding his face, and told him that true strength was not about pretending to be fine. It was about showing up with your heart open, even when it hurts. Keanu's eyes trembled at her words. Something inside him cracked open, not in a painful way, but in a releasing way. For the first time, he let himself lean forward, resting his forehead against hers. Neither of them spoke. They simply breathed the same quiet air, their closeness filled with understanding and warmth. He whispered that he didn't know how to thank her for being there. Sandra gave a small smile and said he didn't need to thank her. She said she was there because she cared, because he mattered to her, and because she knew he would have done the same for her without a second thought. Keanu opened his eyes slowly, looking into hers with a depth that surprised even him. Something unspoken passed between them, something gentle, honest, and quietly powerful. It was not romance yet. It was something deeper, something that looked like the beginning of healing, the beginning of trust, the beginning of a connection he had not expected to grow this fast. Then a nurse approached them, saying the older man had woken up and wanted to see them again. Keanu and Sandra walked back into the room together, side by side, and the older man smiled when he saw them. He looked at Keanu, then at Sandra, and whispered, "This is the beautiful detail people will one day talk about." The older man's voice was weak, but his eyes held a soft glow when he saw Keanu and Sandra walk back into the room together. He motioned for them to come closer, and they did. Keanu took his hand again, gently, as if afraid that too much strength might hurt him. Sandra stood on the other side of the bed, her calm presence filling the room like warm light. The older man whispered that he had watched Keanu carry heavy burdens for years. He said he had seen him give kindness, give patience, give love to the world without ever asking for anything in return. He told Keanu that today, seeing Sandra by his side, he finally felt peace, because he knew Keanu was not alone anymore. Keanu's eyes filled with emotion, and he nodded slowly, his throat too tight to speak. Sandra leaned down and thanked the older man for being a guiding light in Keanu's life. She told him that she understood how much he meant to Keanu because she had seen the way Keanu looked at him, with respect, gratitude, and love. The older man smiled gently and told her she had a rare gift. He said her heart carried a softness that could calm storms in other people. Sandra looked at Keanu silently, her expression tender. After a while, the older man asked for a moment alone with Keanu. Sandra stepped out quietly, waiting in the hallway with her hands wrapped around each other. Inside the room, the older man took a shaky breath and told Keanu something he had held in his heart for years. He said he wanted Keanu to stop walking through life with a closed heart. He wanted him to allow joy back in, love back in, hope back in. Keanu whispered that he was scared. The older man smiled and said that everyone who loves deeply is scared. He reminded Keanu that fear was not a wall, it was a door, and today he had walked through it simply by showing up. Keanu held the man's hand until he fell asleep again peacefully. When Keanu stepped back into the hallway, Sandra rose immediately, her eyes searching his face to understand what he needed. He didn't speak. He simply walked toward her and gently wrapped his arms around her. It was not rushed. It was not dramatic. It was slow, soft, and full of quiet relief. Sandra hugged him back, resting her head against his chest. She could feel the heaviness in him, the gratitude, the exhaustion, the love he carried so silently. After a long moment, he finally whispered that he was afraid to lose people, afraid to open his heart, afraid of life's unpredictable pain. Sandra pulled back slightly and looked into his eyes. She told him gently that opening your heart doesn't erase fear. It simply gives fear a softer place to rest. Those words hit him deeply. They stepped outside the hospital together when evening arrived. The sky was a soft mix of pink and gold, and the quiet street felt peaceful. Keanu took a deep breath, and for the first time that day, his shoulders relaxed slightly. Sandra walked beside him, her steps slow and steady, matching his pace in a way that felt natural. As they reached the car, Keanu turned to her. His voice was quiet when he said that the beautiful detail people noticed earlier at the airport wasn't about the way they looked sitting together. It wasn't about the fans or the cameras. It was the way she saw him, truly saw him, without judgment, without expectation, without noise. Sandra looked down for a moment, her eyes softening, and then she met his gaze again. She whispered that sometimes two people don't meet by accident. Sometimes life places them in the same moment because something inside them recognizes something familiar, something healing, something needed. Keanu stepped closer, not to cross a line, not to rush anything, but simply to let her know he heard her. He told her she had given him strength today. She told him he had allowed her to. As they stood under the fading evening sky, a gentle breeze brushed past them. Keanu looked at her with gratitude that went deeper than words. Sandra gave him a small, warm smile, the kind that stays in a person's memory for a lifetime. They didn't talk about what would come next. They didn't need to. Some connections grow slowly. Some grow quietly. Some grow on days when life feels heavy and the right person walks beside you without being asked. And that was the beautiful detail fans would later talk about. Not their closeness, not their gestures, not the whispers, but the way two hearts found comfort in each other exactly when they needed it most.